That is right. After that introduction music, the On the Blue Line podcast is back. I am your host, Wayne Mulder, and I'm thankful to have the opportunity to sit here, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to it on the radio or onto one of the podcast streaming devices. I have a treat for you. This week's guest you are absolutely going to love. I had a great conversation with him. It was a lot of fun hearing his stories, a lot of fun hearing his experiences, and I know that you are going to enjoy them as well. So the interview room, as you've noticed, is back today. This is the 1st of September, and it is Thursday at 0500. So depending on when you're listening to this, it really doesn't matter. It's all evergreen content. However, it released on Thursday the 1st, which means the interview room will be back every Thursday at 0500 like it always was. So I'm thankful that I am able to sit down here and talk to some of these great guests again, and we have some great ones lined up for you. But to kick it off is Scott Edwards, not a comedian, but a comedy consultant. He's got a fascinating experience, fascinating people that he's met over the years. He was a business entrepreneur and opened over a dozen companies in his lifetime, from a small construction company. He owned a Submarine Beach Shack. Yes, you heard that right. He owned a submarine, and he was a disco producer. But his lifelong love of comedy led to producing live comedy shows, TV series, concerts, and in no time he opened his first comedy club, Laughs Unlimited. He built this into a chain of the most successful comedy clubs in America, and by the way, it is still in existence. In fact, you can check out the website yourself. But he brings his vast experience working with some of the most famous names in comedy: Jay Leno, Jerry Seinfeld, Bob Saget, Dana Carvey, and many other names that you are going to recognize throughout this episode. And it's fascinating to hear his story, hear what he's doing now, and then be introduced to his podcast where he brings some of this comedy and history to you so that you can enjoy that. So I had a great time sitting down with Scott. I know you're going to enjoy this as well. So without taking any more time, here is this week's guest, Scott Edwards. All right. Well, welcome to the show, Scott. How are you doing today, sir?
Oh, hey, man, I'm so excited to be here. Wayne, I've been listening to your podcast. You are such a great connection for those on the blue line, people that put themselves out there for the community each and every day. I'm just thrilled to be here and sharing this moment with you.
Well, Scott, I appreciate that. Yeah, I've seen some of the stuff that you've been doing, and I know that the listeners of the show are going to love it. So I guess we'll kind of start like where I always do. You know, I got these like break the ice type questions I like to throw out to people.
Oh, my gosh, questions. Okay, I'm a little nervous, but whenever you're ready.
Well, I don't want to put you on the spot or anything. But
I'll step up, man.
Well, I'll start very difficult here. Coffee or tea?
It's very funny you asked that. I am a teaaholic. I don't drink coffee, but I probably put away a couple gallons of iced tea each and every day, and then I follow that with a couple gallons of fresh water every night. But anybody that knows me, in fact, Wayne, it was in my wedding vows that my wife had to provide iced tea on a daily basis.
That's perfect.
That sounds crazy. Everyone's got a Piccadilly. That's mine.
There you go. Yeah, and you want to codify that early in the relationship.
Oh, yeah. No, she was aware, but I put it in the vows, damn it. I wanted to make sure.
Now, being iced tea, typically when I ask this question, it's coffee, it's hot tea, and then my follow-up is, where's your favorite place to have that drink? But I would say with something like iced tea, it's everywhere, right?
Well, actually, you're not correct, because so many restaurants let their iced tea sit around so it gets stale, or they insist on putting a damn slice of lemon in. And I have nothing against lemons. You lemon lovers, God bless you. But the restaurants will cut up the lemons early in the morning and then let them just sit out. And so by 2 p.m, lunchtime, and worse in the evening, you order an iced tea and they automatically put this old moldy, half rotted piece of lemon in your tea, and it ruins it. So I always order plain iced tea, no lemon. And then here's a little secret for your health, because you do a lot of health stuff. Being healthy is important, especially for officers risking their life for everybody, which, we so thank you for your service, by the way.
Thank you.
But I drink a lot of tropical flavored teas because I was able to eliminate adding sweetener to my tees. It's probably been 2 decades ago, but that in itself has made me strong and stealth.
I can see that. I may have to take a page out of your book and try that myself.
Well, they're still tasty. In fact, I have one now.
Perfect. Well, and as if you've been a listener, I am a coffee drinker, so of course I have my coffee. But we all have our vices, right?
Right. And my wife's in law enforcement, and she could not start her day and deal with the public without a little bit of coffee.
Yes. In fact, when I was on patrol, it was pretty much around the clock. There was a little bit of coffee involved. So let me ask you, do you have a best or worst travel story?
Best or worst travel story? That's a one I wasn't prepared for. No.
Okay.
No, I've not had any, everybody gets caught in an airport for a delay or something, but I've not had any bad travels, really, tragic travel situations. I will share a fun story.
Okay.
Back in the mid 80s, I owned a chain of comedy clubs and a couple restaurants and a couple art galleries, and I was doing pretty well. And I was recently divorced and single. And I just thought, this would be fun. And I chartered a Learjet and I filled it with young women. And I flew to Vegas, where we got a chance to see a couple shows, do some gambling. And then a day later, we flew to Hollywood, California, where because friends of mine were the host on the shows, we were able to go to the Tonight Show and some of the big clubs and hang out with some people that I work with, and then flew back. And though I don't do that on a regular basis, I've done it twice in my life. But when you charter a private Learjet, it's your jet for that time period. So I got to sit up in the cockpit and see the curvature of the earth from, they fly pretty high. And that was really an exhilarating experience.
Very cool.
The 4 or 5 women in the back had nothing to do with the fun I had.
Yeah, exactly. That's just.
I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression. This was, post-marriage, pre-marriage. That was that little gap in between.
That's awesome. Yeah. And, that actually is probably one of the best travel stories I've heard from the guy that had no travel stories to tell, but that was good.
Well, I've been a blessed man.
Well, Scott, let's start with you mentioned the comedy club, which we'll certainly get into because that has a lot to do with your story. But you were also pretty much a serial entrepreneur right from the beginning, correct?
Yes, sir. Wayne, that's a great question. Like a lot of young people, I was born in 1955 in the 60s as a youth. Money was a little tight. I would guess, lower middle class, maybe higher underclass. But we grew up with a pretty strong work ethic. I was mowing lawns, babysitting, do whatever around the house. Paper route. I had a great paper route with the San Francisco Chronicle. And man, you don't want to deliver that on a Sunday. But when I was 17 years old, I started my first small construction company. And then it went to a portable music / disco company, just to age myself. And then at the young age of 24 in 1980, I opened the 12th full-time comedy club in the United States, ran it for 21 years, but I sold out. It's still operating. So it started off as one of the first in the country, and now it's one of the oldest, longest standing comedy clubs in the country. Laughs Unlimited.
That is great. It's hard to believe that it was number 12 back in 1980. I don't know. I get that was a while ago.
Well, what it was stand-up comedy wasn't really an accepted art form yet. There was a couple clubs like the Comedy Store and the Improv in LA. There was Catch a Rising Star in the Improv in New York, and a couple other clubs sprinkled around in 1980 when I opened. However, much like Starbucks, by 1985, all the discos converted to comedy clubs, and they were on every corner for a while. So I was able to get on to stand-up comedy as an entertainment before the big wave, and then I rode that wave, and thus the Learjet.
I love it. What was the draw to comedy for you?
It was really a fluke, Wayne. I was selling life insurance at 3 years old, and absolutely hated it. When you're young, you don't understand, you can't relate to dying someday and selling insurance. But I'm a salesman at heart, and I was pretty successful. And I was on vacation with my then girlfriend, soon to be wife, soon to be ex-wife, and went to a satellite version of the Comedy Store in Westwood, California. And my father, who has a great sense of humor, said, "You got to go check out this club. It's amazing." And I go and pay, I think it was a $2 cover on like a Wednesday night. And Dave Coulier, Sandra Bernhardt, George Wallace, and a number of other comics were there. And I had so much fun. And again, I've already been an entrepreneur and started a couple companies. So I stayed till after the show, and I'm picking the brain of the comics. I met the manager and was talking to them. And on the 6-hour drive back to Sacramento, I had decided that that was my future. Got home, quit my job, went bankrupt, which was really stupid. I think I owed $2,800 and ruined my credit for 10 years. But I wanted to lay the groundwork so that I could go into this industry I knew nothing about. And that was stand-up comedy. I went back down to LA. That's when I met Bob Saget, and he and Dave Coulier were real mentors, along with George Wallace, who is out of Las Vegas, to kind of tell me what needed to be done, how to operate. I went to some of the clubs and talked to other club managers and just picked their brain. That's how I did all my companies. I always talk to those that do it and learn from their mistakes. And then in August of 1980, I wheeled and dealed my way into the banquet room of a restaurant without any lease. It was a trade-off, and opened my doors. My very first show, your audience might enjoy this. Anybody over 40 should know this name. My opening act, making $100 a week, his first out-of-town gig out of his hometown of Phoenix, Arizona, was Gary Shandling.
Wow. That is amazing. And that's really what I'm thinking of as you're talking here. We're talking the early days of the careers of a lot of these comedians. I mean, this is pre Full House and pre for Bob Saget.
Right. No, I had the pleasure to help develop and work with, I mean, I don't want to do too much obvious name dropping, but Bob Saget, Dana Carvey, Gary Shandling, Jerry Seinfeld, Ellen DeGeneres, they all worked for me. Paula Poundstone really got her start. She came out of Boston. She sucked, and I let her work week after week until she developed an act and made a relationship with Robin Williams, and then he took her under his arms and helped made her who she was. But no, I had a chance to work with all those people, and it was great. Ray Romano, Will Shriner, there was dozens of them.
Wow. That's really pretty cool, actually. Now, I do have to ask, because I've heard that.
Wait, Wayne. Pretty cool, actually. Now, come on. This was before they were famous. I saw their talent. I saw that raw piece of coal I knew would be a gem someday.
You just knew.
I had no freaking clue what I was doing.
That's the beauty of it, like in those days. I would imagine that for a lot of these guys, like you say, with Gary Shandling, 150 bucks a week or whatever it was. I mean, he's just getting started. He didn't know the Hollywood career ahead of him and so forth. It's just such a
he ended up being right. He ended up with the Larry Sanders Show, the Gary Shandling Show. He was in over 50 movies in one way or another. Very, very talented guy. We're so sorry he passed young, but Gary Shandling was one of those guys that helped. Not only did I help progress his career, but he was a real asset to me as a young entrepreneur and what it takes to operate a club.
Wow. Now, I do have to ask, I've heard that you may have a picture of him in women's clothing. I mean, you opened the door. That's
yeah. So it's kind of a funny story. My club was in an area called Old Sacramento in Central California, and it's a tourist area that's was built in the 1800s. And around the corner from my comedy club was one of those places where families could go in and do portraits, but wearing the clothes of the 1800s and, this and that. So one day, Gary comes in and he hands me this gift that was autographed to me. And it's a picture of Gary Shandling all done up. He's got the long lacy dress. He's got the big sunny Sunday bonnet, a fan, and he was just decked out in this women's attire from the 1800s, and he was just doing it as a lark, and gave it to me as a gift, and we immediately put it up on the wall of fame in the comedy club. And what's funny about that story, Wayne, is that not 3 weeks later, a good friend and very talented comic, Bob Saget, was working for me. He saw this and didn't want to be outdone. He went over to the same place, and he went that extra step. I mean, he looked like a school marm right out of 1820, and came in, and he had a picture of flowing dress and I don't know, the corset and the whole, I mean, he was just decked out, autographed it to me. And I put that up next to the Gary Shandling picture. And those two pictures stood in my club for over a decade. But it was really an honor that they thought that was funny, and that they, gave it to me as a gift. That was really special.
I'm sure. I love it. So any stories or anything other than obviously that one, which is wonderful, but anything from those early days, the grind kind of, you're getting started and you're getting acts in there, and any stories from those days, maybe something a little crazy or.
Well, there's of course probably too many, and it's hard to narrow it down. And I know that makes me a horrible guest, Wayne. I'm not sure why I'm here on the Blue Line, but
well, we could go on for hours. I mean, if you want this part one of 500, we could, Scott.
But and for your audience, I did spend 2 years writing a book on my experiences and stories from my 40 plus years on what I call the fringe of show business, because Sacramento is certainly not a hotbed for entertainment. But when I finished the book, my wife took a look at it and said, "No one's going to read this crap. Do a podcast." And so I put together my podcast and launched it just right before COVID, coincidentally, called Standup Comedy, Your Host and MC. And on that show, I share actual material from Saget and Seinfeld and Shandling from back in the 80s and 90s. And then also I do interviews with current celebrities like Will Shriner, Kelly Monteith out of England, Amazing Jonathan out of Vegas. And so that's a great place for your audience to go to get the straight poop. As far as a quick story, I think that one of the things that is interesting, Wayne, if I may extrapolate, is that my father, as I mentioned, had a great sense of humor. And I wanted to, I think we all do, we want to please and make our parents proud. And so I had the opportunity to book, for example, Pat Paulson, who was a regular on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour and ran for president a couple times, and we became very good friends. I also had Soupy Sales. And for those of you out there over 50, you know that I had a pie thrown in my face by Soupy Sales, which was quite an honor, because he did that to presidents and astronauts and famous people, celebrities, all through his TV show. And but what the comedy club did, and the reason I brought it up, Wayne, is that it allowed me to interact with not only my generation and the next generation of comics, but I reached back and was able to work with some of the celebrities of the past. And that was really cool.
Wow. I agree. I think that's really neat. And some of these names, of course, now I'm going to irritate you by saying these are names I heard from my dad, but but yeah, I mean, I think that's awesome, to kind of bridging the gap between those two times of comedy. I want to go down real quick. You mentioned your book. That would be a stand-up comic or just look like one?
Well, actually, no. The book I wrote that my wife openly mocked never got printed. I went to the podcast, but you are correct. I've written 2 books back in the 80s when comedy was really this hot wave, and everybody thought if they could do 5 minutes on stage, they'd make the Tonight Show, right? So we wrote a book, my partner and I, Bob Stobner, called Be a Stand-Up Comic or Just Look Like One. And it was really, the first half of the book talks about all the nightmares of the show business side of stand-up comedy. And then we figure if people kept reading, the last half of the book is a true training and advice book on people that want to get into the industry. And now I'm kind of, as I'm semi-retired, getting back into this area I love called stand-up comedy. I wrote another book, came out in December. It's on Amazon. Go today. called 20 Questions Answered about being a stand-up comic. And it's a shorter version of the first book, only there's none of the negativity. It's really just quick advice with illustrations that would help somebody that's an amateur go pro.
Okay. Curiosity question, and I know some listeners, what one thing I find interesting, I've listened to some of your other shows and some of the other things that you've been on and spoken about, and one of the things that I find kind of neat is how you draw this line between a stand-up comic but then also other arts where people speak and they have to talk to an audience, and you have to, there is some performance in a lot of different things, and that you kind of draw that. So let me ask this question, then we can kind of go down that road a little bit. What is the biggest mistake that new comedians or beginners make?
I think that good question, Wayne. I think that the mistake that people make is that they forget that the stage is for the audience and not for themselves. I've seen a lot of amateurs and even a few pros, meaning they've gotten paid by somebody to do their bit, their comedy show, um, forget that it's an entertainment format and that they're there to entertain the audience. They're there for the audience. Some entertainers or beginners especially think the stage is for them. It becomes a therapy session or it becomes a rant, right? And if it's not funny, I mean, everybody knows Dennis Miller and his famous rants, political rants, but Dennis Miller is funny and is trying to rant about poignant topics, whereas a lot of these amateurs just want to go up and yell at the world, and I think they're forgetting the first rule of entertainment, and that's you're there for the audience.
Yeah. And I think that's true. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's true in other pursuits as well. Whenever you're speaking, whether it's in a podcast format or public speaking and so forth, a lot of times people are worried more solely about the message and about what they're trying to convey rather than what the reason why the people are there in the first place.
Exactly. And that's a good point to reiterate, Wayne. I also want to add to that, as a lifelong salesman, huckster, showman, you whatever you want to call me. The other thing that I learned early in life that would be good advice for anybody out there that's in sales or wants to get in entertainment is you have to listen to your customer or listen to your audience, right? A lot of people just talk and talk and talk and never shut up and listen. So, when I'm selling something, I ask a question and then I listen, because it's what the audience wants to hear or what a client or customer wants and needs that is the key to that engagement, to that connection. Now, obviously, there's a difference between selling insurance and selling comedy, but the theory, the overriding basis is the same, in that you have to be able to engage with either that potential client or that audience, or it doesn't work.
Yeah. No, that I agree with that. And that makes a lot of sense. That's really good advice.
Oh,
There's
that's one for me.
there's been several nuggets. I must say, Scott, they're really good. I'm enjoying it.
Oh, good, Wayne, because you're the boss.
Well, appreciate that. Let me and before I forget, because we're at that midway point, so I don't want anyone, in case they decide they have to go get the kids or whatever, the best place that they need to go to look at that book and so forth is scottscomedystuff.com, correct?
Yeah, really fancy name. I know, Wayne. I don't want to confuse the audience, but scottscomedystuff.com does have access to not only my online comedy course, my books, my podcast, but also I have a great archive of videos of people like Bob Saget, Ray Romano, Paula Poundstone, and many others performing on my stages. Dana Carvey came to me as an opening act, and we got a chance to work with him many times. I have a great video I can send you of him with his brother's band performing Chopping Broccoli, his famous Saturday Night Live song. But this is 2 years before he got the show. In fact, quick side story, Wayne, that your audience might enjoy. Dana was a regular at my club. He quickly moved from opening act to headliner. And there was a Friday night that we were hanging out in a hot tub having cocktails after the show. So we're talking 2 in the morning or so. And that's when he shared with me he had just had a call from Lorne Michaels asking him to come out that next Monday to New York to try out for Saturday Night Live. Of course, he ended up getting the job and was a big star on that show for several years.
Yes, he was. Very cool. Um, and a little side note on, I enjoy that it's scottscomedystuff.com, because I heard it previously may have been like stand-up comedy, your host and MC.com. And I appreciate you taking a few words out of there. So for the listener, it's scottscomedystuff.com.
The other one's still out there, stand-up comedy, your host and MC.com. But that's a website based on the podcast. And I decided to try to, tighten it all up. But thanks for pointing that out.
Well, I enjoyed it, and I made sure the URL worked before I brought it up on the show.
And
I'm
still learning. So, at my tender young age, there's always a lot to learn.
For all of us, Scott, for all of us. Let me, we've talked about kind of what I consider some of the best years of comedy, but that may be a little one-sided because born right before the 80s in 79, I kind of grew up through the Saturday Night Live of the 90s and so forth. And
you were born in the 70s? I'm
79,
sorry.
like barely.
I'll talk slower. I don't want you to miss anything. There was a lot of drugs going on with your parents at that time.
Well, maybe not my parents, but yes, in the era there absolutely was.
But you have a different generation of entertainment. For example, I am a guest on several podcasts, and people will ask me who's out there that's funny now, but I'm actually more disconnected with the industry. I still produce about 4 fundraisers a year, but I still use the guys that I used back in the 80s and the 90s because they're clean, they're professional, and they've got 30 years experience, right? They're pros. Yeah. I'm not really up on who's hot today. I think one of the great success stories is, if anybody ever watched the TV show The Big Bang Theory, one of their co-stars is Brian Posehn, who plays the gemologist or something like that on the show. But Brian Posehn came to me as a MC opening act and got his start in stand-up comedy right here in Sacramento on my stage, and now he's a very successful actor. So and I'm mentioning that because that happened late in the 90s as opposed to the Bob Sagets and Gary Shandlings and stuff. So there was people constantly coming through the club that had that opportunity for success.
Yeah. One thing that I was going to kind of segue to, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this, is because there is somewhat of a controversy these days when it comes to comedy, and we've seen it in the last few years. We saw it with the Netflix controversy with a couple comedians, Dave Chappelle and so forth. And there seems to be this whole thing with the cancel culture in comedy. Does comedy survive cancel culture in your opinion?
Well, I think it will, but it is very, very challenging. I mean, first, we were all put out of business during COVID because there was no stages of theater, music, or comedy anywhere. And then we come out of that and this crap woke stuff happened. And it is very challenging for young entertainers to bridge that gap between stand-up comedy, which is the last bastion of free speech. In other words, you should be able to go on stage and say anything you want. Now, as a producer, I want it to be funny. I prefer it to be clean, and it has to relate to the audience. But honestly, there's plenty of entertainers that don't follow those rules, and yet they still have a right to share their voice on a comedy stage. That's what it's all about, freedom of speech. And this new woke environment is a huge challenge to that. And I, for one, don't like it and am somewhat fearful of what it'll do to the industry. However, as an older gentleman, I will say that I've seen the pendulum swing back and forth. And right now, it may be very leftist and wokish, but I think already the general public is getting tired of that, and it's starting to come back. And that hopefully in the coming years, we'll have a little bit more normalcy and acceptance of each other without these weird, restrictions and rules, he, she, them, frickin' frack. I'm not going to, don't get me going on my soapbox, Wayne.
Well, I was trying, but you wouldn't take the bait.
Well, how was your vacation to Maine and everything? Did you get a good break?
I did. I have had the opportunity to go up there. That is a part of the country I'd never really been to before. And growing up in the Midwest, I was a Midwest boy, and then I'm currently in Florida. So the
Oh,
Northeast is
okay.
a different world in some
Yeah.
ways. If you're from
Well,
like Indiana,
I was curious if you had like normal vacations. I was sharing with you before we went to the recording that my wife is in federal law enforcement. She happens to be an agent with the National Park Service. She's an intelligence analyst, which your listeners would know the difference between that and an actual agent. But she works crimes in the national parks from coast to coast. And I only brought it up because we recently went on a couple vacations during COVID, one to the south when we went to Bryce Canyon and Grand Canyon, and one to the north when we went to um, Custer State Park and Yellowstone and places like that. And I got to tell you, Wayne, I don't know what vacationing with you is like, but when I'm vacationing with my wife, instead of, ooh, look at that shrine, or ooh, look at that beautiful mountain, and here's the history, she's like, oh, hey, there was a murder right over there. And oh, in 4 years ago, there was a rape and kidnapping over there. And, ooh, they found some bones under this. You know, I mean, it's a whole different vacation experience. Please help me.
well, and not being, and of course for analysts it's different because they're looking at all these cases, and anyone in the intelligence side, they're looking at everything, and they have that general knowledge of what occurred everywhere. So I can just imagine, especially someone tied to the national park side, we have that same issue at home every day when you're with a county or a city, or it's like, yeah, I found a guy, he was deceased in the Publix parking lot at the grocery store, or hey, I saw, and everywhere you walk in the town it's kind of like that. I know
Oh,
this
that's
happened or saw that.
interesting. Yeah, so it's the same idea on a smaller scale. My wife, coincidentally, is the single and only intelligence analyst for the National Park Service. So she's involved in every major crime that happens in any of the national parks across the country. So her depth of and she's brilliant and smart and great memory. I'm not sure why she's with me, but she so there's a story attached to almost encased to every national park, which is fascinating. But I think you're right, as a local beat cop, and again, thanks for your service, it's got to be interesting that you're with your family, it's your day off, and ooh, that place got robbed last week, or see that burnout building, that was arson. I mean, you do have kind of the behind the scenes secrets of the town.
Yes, you
What
do.
what a powerful thing.
I
Or
agree.
disturbing. I don't know, Wayne. We should ask your audience.
And it can be both, and I think you're going to hear both, because that's one of the negatives. In fact, a lot of guys will talk about not wanting to live in the same area that they work for that
Oh,
very
that's
reason,
interesting.
because you never know
Yeah.
who you may run into. I mean, you go to a store or whatever, and it happens to be the guy you arrested in a domestic a couple weeks ago. I mean, there's all these factors
Oh,
from.
that's interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't even think you could run into the people you arrested. Well, if that was the case with my wife, I guess we'll be moving to Australia, because if we got
Right.
away from where she works, right, we'd have to leave the whole country.
Exactly. I had no idea there was an analyst tied to the National Park Service. That's pretty cool, actually.
Well, her job, of course, is in the support role. She's not
Right.
an armed officer, but she does all the work for the agents behind the scenes. So as you know, an agent is assigned to a particular case. As they're working the case, they need somebody to support them that runs the background checks, can run the DMV information, can run the connections, what's their car, what's their license plate, who are their relatives, who are their friends. And that's her job, is that she supports the active agents.
Scott, yeah, that's one of the things that I was thinking about. When it comes to the analyst and so forth, and I know that's a support position for the National Park Service, but a lot of agencies, both federal and state, I talk about this a lot on my show because it's kind of specific to law enforcement, but I'm very fortunate to be at an agency that is different than a lot of other agencies. And we're very forward thinking when it comes to things such as analysts. So we have, I'm not even going to guess, dozens or more analysts, and we're not that large of a department, but that's such an important part. So I find that interesting, that something like the National Park Service would need someone that is doing the analyst work. And I can just imagine the neat things that she can do to kind of help support in that role.
Yeah, and let me give you and your listeners a little back information, and I don't think that's any secret or anything, but there's two things that make it difficult. One is that to Congress and to the government and to the National Park Service Administration, there are no crimes in the parks. They're a place of joy and wonder of wildlife. There is we do not have a crime problem. And of course, which is all bullshit because Yosemite itself gets, you know, 1 million or plus visitors a year. You can't get 1 million strangers in one location and not have issues, just as an example. The other is because they don't see crime as an issue in the National Park Service, it's also not a priority. So that's why my wife is a single and sole um, support person for the entire country. She would rather have some help. There are other people that she supports and that support her in other ways, like the tip lines and stuff. But it is really that it would take an act of Congress to create. She doesn't have an actual job with the Park Service. That's where she works. But because they don't have money for this, and a lot of your listeners may know what this is, she also is a intelligence analyst for HIDA.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you familiar with HIDA?
I am. Yes.
So for those that aren't, it's high intelligence drug traffic enforcement. It's every county and district in the country will have a HIDA office, which helps coordinate between the various departments, whether it's sheriff, city, police, National Park Service, Forest Service, even the Coast Guard, anybody that might get involved in drugs. Ooh, I wonder if that's an issue.
On the national park land, nonetheless.
Yeah. So HIDA oversees all that. Well, my bride actually works for both because one doesn't have a position for her and the money for her, and the other has the money and the position. But, you know, there's several analysts on the HIDA side.
Yeah.
So they literally share her with the National Park Service, and that's how she's the lone intelligence analyst for the Park Service. But it is fascinating. I think that there's some things I just shared that, you know, explain a lot about the operation of our government. But you know, that it is what it is, and she's good at her job and helps solve some very big crimes. If you see anything on TV or in the news that involves a national park, she's been involved, and I'm very proud of her. I will say that your listeners who are on the Blue Line, thank you for everything you guys do. But as her support person, and to all the wives and husbands of law enforcement out there, our jobs are difficult too. We have to be there for our spouses that are in law enforcement because they need it. They need that support. They need that balance in their lives. And a great example is my wife's job is top secret, you know. So she'll come home and I go, "Hey, honey, how was your day?" And she goes, "Hey, sorry, can't tell you."
Yep.
And right. So yeah, I'm sure you've been there. So you know, there has to be a balance, a spouse that can offer an escape and support to the people on the Blue Line. So for everybody out there, thank you, but also remember the support people in your lives. It's very important.
I'm so glad you touched on that, Scott, because that is a important, if not sometimes forgotten part, is the spouses and the support system for the law enforcement officer. I mean, even like you said, you know, there's times you come home, you can't talk about it. And then there's times like you send a quick text because you're going to be hours late and be like, if you see this in the media, just know I'm okay. And I'm not going to tell you anything about it. And most of what they said is wrong, you know, but that
exactly. I mean,
yeah.
the press is famous for not getting things right. So no, that's exactly true. And that's why I wanted to bring it up, is that I couldn't be prouder of the work my bride does. But I take seriously and comically at times my role is the balance in her life.
Yeah. That is extremely important. And that is, of course, kind of the whole premise of what On the Blue Line is all about. So let's segue into your story a little bit further. You already talked a little bit about moving into the podcasting. So you did the stand-up comedy, your host and MC podcast. Um, what kind of brought you to that? What was the draw that made you want to go to that form besides the book and being told, don't write
Okay, I
another
was
one?
worried that you weren't listening to me, Wayne. Come on,
Well,
we
I was
talked about
sleeping a
that as
little bit
being
during
important.
that.
No, so I wrote a book. I've had some amazing experiences, gotten a chance to work with some amazing creative people in my life and been very blessed. And the book was a way to celebrate that. And it is true in this day and age. I could have put the book out there and nobody would read it. By doing a podcast, I know not only get a chance to share those stories, but it also allows me to share actual recorded material of people like Bob Saget and Dave Coulier on stage, which you can't do in a book. And then also that's from the 80s and 90s, but to keep it fresh, every other week I interview a professional entertainer or a club owner. I just interviewed Bob Fisher, who owned the Ice House for 40 years, Neil Hassman, who's a manager of talent, Ed Solomon, who started off as a stand-up comic and became a writer and wrote Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure series, all the Men in Black movies, very, very successful movie writer. And I've got a chance to interview these guys and reconnect. And I think that's what's important to me, is that I'm able to reconnect to a part of my past that I've thoroughly enjoyed and value. And then sharing that with the audience. I don't have, a massive audience. I get, maybe 250 downloads a week or something per show, but it's not about that. It's that there's a connection that is bringing me joy. And and I get to share that. And so I just, again, I was blessed in my youth. I feel blessed in my semi-retirement. And thank you for mentioning it and plugging it. And everybody out there, if you get a chance, stand-up comedy, your host and MC, has a lot of valuable content. But let me extrapolate a little bit. Wayne, you mentioned it earlier before we started. Um, I'm working on some special projects, and in that, I took all the bonus shows. We're talking 3 to 5 minute comedy bits, jokes, and stories that are new, that are recorded within the last couple of years, and took them out of the original podcast and created a new podcast called Comedy Appetizers. And that's a name my wife came up with. Comedy Appetizers is short form comedy entertainment that comes out each and every Friday to start your weekend with a smile.
And I love those. And I encourage the listeners, definitely, there's going to be a link in the show notes to the Spotify and Apple Podcast and all the places you can go to get it. But those are enjoyable. Like you said, they're short. There's something that you can just enjoy if you're driving around your squad car, here, there, wherever you're out for a little walk on Friday morning or whatever, just take a listen to it. But Comedy Appetizers, I really enjoy those. And that's part of why I wanted to have you on here.
Oh, thanks, Wayne. Well, it is a little bit different format. Sometimes it's a comedy bit, sometimes it's just jokes, but the idea is to share something in short form and new. It's not from the 80s or 90s, it's fresh, that gives the audience an opportunity to take a short break from whatever's happening. Let me give you a little bit more on that, Wayne. One of the reasons we as human beings enjoy entertainment is it's a break from our regular lives. Everybody goes through, especially law enforcement, you have a lot of challenges and risk, and you got your bills, you have your family. There's all these stresses that we deal with. And entertainment, whether it's a music concert, a play, and especially in a comedy show or comedy, it's a little bit of a break from the pressures on our shoulders in life. And my regular show, which is anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour, is a hour break so that you're not thinking about whatever else is stressing you. What's great about Comedy Appetizers is that we don't always have an hour. Sometimes we just have 5 minutes, and it allows you to take kind of like a deep breath and relax and let it out slowly and give that tension release in a short format. And I'm very proud of it. And I'm glad that you caught it and had me on your show. So plug, comedy, appetizers, check it out. And it just launched not even 2 weeks ago. So this is brand new. This is new just for your listeners.
I love it. And they can easily catch up because there's only a handful on there. You can get started, and that way you never miss one coming up. You answer, being the professional that you are, sir, you answered my next question already in that answer. So excellent job. We'll just go on.
Either that or I'm just long-winded. Sorry, Wayne.
I'm going to bring it up, though, because I want to frame the question that you already answered. Because when I was saying, and this is, we're just narrowing down to the last couple questions I have for you. And when I was sitting down, because it's kind of like you and I talked off air when we were starting, whenever I have a guest on that's not in law enforcement, I often ask myself, why am I bringing this person on and what do they have to share? I had at the time no idea that your wife was in law enforcement, but what do they have to share with this community and so forth? And then piggybacking on that, one of the themes of a lot of what I talk about is what's going on, the divisive times that we're in, the separation that we have and so forth. So it kind of led me to a why of, how is it that, or what is it about comedy that makes it so important? Why is it so important? And I liken it in some ways, if I may expound, to
it's how your show, damn it, go for it.
To how sports is sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Sports is supposed to be one of those escapes, and sadly, a couple of years ago, it became the opposite of that. So
that's so funny you mentioned that, and I have to really work hard not to get on my soapbox. But my wife and I enjoy the Sacramento Kings, one of the worst teams in history, is here in Sacramento. But we used to love going to the games, and then politics worked its way into basketball, and they had slogans on their shoes and defund the cops and stuff. And it's like, what the frick, sports is supposed to be an escapism, like I was just talking about. It's not as bad in baseball, but the guy that's in charge of the league is making bad choices when it comes to China and other places, and it just like basketball, and it taints it a little bit. I think that football, which is interesting, went through this several years ago with, I think Kaepernick was his name. Was that right?
Yeah.
On the Niners. I thought he sucked anyway. But anyway, and I used to be a Niners fan. But the point is that it got too much attention. It was taking football down that political path. But unlike basketball, the football owners realized they were alienating a large part of their audience, and they kind of backed off it. You don't see, like, there might still be some a-hole, I don't want to be wrong on your show, but taking a knee for the national anthem or something. But the football owners won't let that be seen on TV. They're not allowed to share their personal points of view, because you know what, nobody gives a damn. Right. We want to watch football, we want to watch sports as escapism, to enjoy something that's different than our regular lives where we have all this stress. So the last thing we want to do is politicize it. And sadly, what you brought up earlier, this woke society, it's creeping into education, it's creeping into entertainment, it's creeping into sports. And folks, put your foot down. It's got to stop. Politics belongs in DC with the circus, and the clowns there. It doesn't belong in basketball, baseball, football, tennis, soccer, you name it. It doesn't belong necessarily on comedy stages. Although if some guy wants to go up and rant about the ridiculousness of the woke society and everybody being ultra sensitive. I mean, imagine Don Rickles. I know you're young, but Don Rickles in this day and age would have been tarred and feathered. I mean, right. He was a comedy classic that his whole point of view was, I'm picking on everybody because we're all in this together. And by picking on everybody, it makes us through engagement, one unit, human beings. Yeah. But today's people are so they got the blinders on. They only see and hear what they want to see, and it's an insult, and it's I'm sorry I got on the soapbox anyway, didn't I? But no problem. The point is you are correct that today's divisive society, I got to say one more thing. It's so funny because they all want to blame Trump. And the only reason Trump pissed off so many people was he was a businessman, not a politician. So he didn't play by the swamp rules, and he stepped on a massive amount of toes. And I wasn't even a big fan of Trump as a person, but as a leader of this country, he did everything right and was really taking us in the right direction. Now we got Mr. Fluffy Pants in there that can, barely conceive of a concise thought, and the woke people that are pulling his strings. And look what's happened to the country. I mean, we're literally falling apart. And I am a patriot. I love my country. I pray every night that the people in government get their head out of their ass and realize where they're taking us. But, who knows? And I'm sorry to get opinionated on your podcast.
No.
We're talking about comedy and all the people out there that are risking their lives for all of us. And I don't mean to get on a soapbox, but it is just sad. I mean, it's so funny. Let's defund the police. Well, now crime's through the roof, and there's the highest murder rates in towns all over the country. And the Democrats, or at least the liberals, are kind of going, well, what happened? It must have been Trump's fault. I mean, it's just freaking ridiculous.
Yeah.
Did you hear that in a small town? I'm not even sure where it was. I think in North Carolina, the entire police force just quit.
Yep.
And that was a small town.
That was in North
people.
Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah, and they had only like 7 officers, 2,000 people in the town, but the whole department just quit because some woke person, she took charge and was making their jobs undoable.
Right.
And good for them. I almost wish, law enforcement, all these people that we've seen retire and get out of this wondrous giving. I mean, when you're a police officer, whether you're an intelligence analyst or on the line, you're risking something. You're there for the public. As they always say, like firefighters, it's the cops that run towards the gunfire. They're not running away. Firefighters run into a fire. And I know there's a little competition there, but the point is
somebody has to be second. But anyway, go
ahead. The point is those people should be idolized, not defunded, not picked on, not have stuff thrown at them, not disrespected. And I think if there's some way to get through to the young, especially male part of our humanity that feel that their rights outweigh the rights of everybody around them, and their disrespect of law enforcement is what leads to the problems.
Right.
All right, I'll shut up on that. Let's get back to comedy.
Well, and definitely,
sorry, ladies and gentlemen.
And I think that's, kind of like how we started the segue, is how important comedy and sports and these things are to this society of kind of giving us that escape. But let me quickly say and preface that I don't disagree with anything you said. And I think it's important. In fact, here in recent episodes and some of the new ones that are coming out, I've talked a little bit more about politics. It's not a political show, and I'm not trying to become political per se.
I apologize to your listeners.
No, but not in any way, Scott, because I think one of the things law enforcement officers need to understand, some of the things that are going on right now, defund the police movement and so forth, we're not talking about simply a different ideas. This isn't like classical liberalism where you and I just agree to disagree, but we agree on the fundamentals. We agree on the Bill of Rights. We agree on the Constitution. We agree on what made this country what this country is, and we just disagree on big government or whatever the situation may be. That's perfectly fine. What we're seeing now, though, is very destructive ideologies, and sadly, it's affecting law enforcement officers. And that's what I keep bringing up on this show is, hey, this reaction to this shooting or this reaction to this event or these sad situations that have been in the news recently with these young children, like cursing and throwing things at cops. I wrote a blog on it that's going to be coming out here in a couple of weeks. And we're seeing a trend that is only going to make the jobs of law enforcement more difficult and less safe. So I appreciate everything you said.
Well, I just think and you're right about young people. There's an overall sense of disrespect for authority, which when it comes to your teacher or your governor or your senator, there needs to be not a disrespect, but a questioning of that opinion or authority. But when it comes to law enforcement, you should not disrespect what they're doing, which is, it's like our military. They're risking their lives for our benefit. And it's so this is kind of a side point, but there's so many people that all they want to do is tear down this country and complain about it. And I'm like, okay, leave. You know,
Yeah.
the thing is, we're still the best country in the world. We have the most freedom. We have all this, and yet people want to tear it down. I go live in Mexico or even Europe or even Canada. I mean, they have a dictator there.
Yeah.
Socialism doesn't work. And you think the police are tough here or disrespect your rights, you know, try living in Argentina or Chile, you know, but they won't, because
Right.
they know, yet they still want to complain and tear down this country and the people that protect it. And again, I got back up on my soapbox, but it does frustrate me and it irritates me. And I'm an older guy. I'm 67. I've seen a lot. This country's gone through a lot during my lifetime. I was in the draft for Vietnam. God bless, I didn't have to go, but I was in the draft for 2 years. I knew some people that were lost during that war. My father was in the Korean War. You know, we feel a pride in this country, which means you have to respect and have a pride in the military and the law enforcement that keeps our society as safe as possible. And it is just frustrating that what you're mentioning, that lack of respect, is not being utilized by adults, but worse, it's being taught
Yeah.
to our next generation, and that's just going to lead to more trouble. And I don't have the simple answer, but I hope somebody wakes up and starts some changes.
Absolutely. No, I think that's powerful. And coming full circle, it really is what makes and made everything that we're talking about, you know, through the 80s and the 90s and some of the best years of comedy, and really everything that this great nation has provided comes out of these fundamentals and the people that have protected it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. They're fundamentals, but you're right. You know, there was a lot going on in the 60s, and
Yep.
there was a lot going on in the 70s. And guess what? This country, because of its foundation, survived it. I think we'll survive this. I just think it's sad that it's so funny because we don't learn from history. And you know, we went through this in the 60s, and here it's coming back. I mean, I try very hard not to watch the news, but just in the last week there's been several fights and mini riots in family operated amusement parks. And it's like, you know, you don't go to Disneyland to have confrontations. You're there to what we were talking about, escapism. It should be family fun. It should be enjoyable, and people don't respect that, and it's just damaging. But I'm glad you brought up sports, and we shared a little political opinion. And please send all your cards and letters to Wayne Mulder at we
And
don't
I
give a
do like opinions
damn.com.
and I do like the feedback. So definitely, you guys know the social media and it's all in the link. So definitely let us know what you think. Well, within reason, I guess, right? No,
No, it's okay. We could take it. We wouldn't be where we were if we weren't thick skinned, right?
absolutely. And I wouldn't be who I am and believe as strongly as I do about the things that you're bringing up if it wasn't that I 100% believe in free speech and the differing of opinions. E pluribus unum is really, we've got to get back there out of many one. So we all have different walks of life, different places we come from. But at the end of the day, we're all Americans. And if we can get there, we have a chance.
Yeah. Well, it may not happen in what's left of my lifetime, but you're a young man. Let's hope it happens. Anyway, so comedy, comedy. Let's get back to that.
Yes.
My podcast, Comedy Appetizers, and stand-up comedy host MC are both a great escape from all the crap that I was just talking about. So forget what well, don't forget, but pass on what I just shared. Go listen to some comedy. Give yourself and your brain and your stress levels and your self a break and have a laugh. And I got to tell you, Wayne, laughing is healthy. It's been medically proven that laughing out loud It releases endorphins that not only make you feel good, but are healthy for your body. So just like people that are dealing with disease or cancer, they watch, old Laurel and Hardy movies or Charlie Chaplin and some of the classics, or listen to stand-up comedy today. It's not only good for your stress levels, it's good for your mental and physical health.
Absolutely, it is.
And
Well,
I'm Dr. Edwards.
I like it. Well, I was going to say, when I was doing some research, it looked like you've done all sorts of things. But anyway, I digress. Let me go down this road. What is next for you, sir? What is on the horizon? Obviously, you've got the podcast, but anything else that you're working on? Any other projects the listeners should be aware of?
Well, thank you, Wayne. That's the perfect question. And yes, I kind of alluded to it. So I have my one podcast. I just created Comedy Appetizers. I'm in the process of recording and about to launch a third one called The Magic Hat, a comedy magic discussion where I interview some professional comic magicians about why they added comedy to their magic and how it affects their interactions with an audience. It's very fascinating. Spent 10, they're about 20 minutes long each, and I did 10 of them with Larry Wilson, who is had over 100 TV shots, done big stage shows in Vegas and Reno, and currently is doing cocktails and conjuring at high-end hotels around the country. But that was great. But the reason I'm doing all this, and here's the next secret for your listeners. Coming out in September, I'm launching Stand-Up Comedy Podcast Network. So there'll be a one-spot location where right now I have 7 podcasts. There'll be a joke of the day. There'll be access to my online comedy course, access to my videos, and it will continue to grow and morph. It starts in September, but I'm hoping within a year it'll be massive. And not only is it a website, but it's an app, Wayne, that people can go on to. Officers on patrol that are looking for a little break, you'll find Comedy Appetizers, you'll find stand-up comedy hosted MC, you'll find the Magic Hat and many others. A place you can go on your phone or on your personal device that will lead you to all kinds of stand-up comedy entertainment. I'm very excited about it. It launches in September.
That is a great project, and I will be sure. In fact, this is perfect timing. It's almost like we planned all this, Scott. It's perfect timing, so I will be sure to have that in the show notes, because when this comes out, that will be coming out. So everyone, be sure to check it out, and I will have those links for you. One last question for you, Scott. I ask everyone some derivative of this question. It is my I can't say the word. We're going to take everything that we just talked about, and we're going to distill it down into one final question. Typically, the question is, what is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives? But we've talked about a lot of different things. So what is the one takeaway from what we've talked about, or maybe something we haven't yet, that's actionable, something that someone can do right now that's going to help them in their personal life, their life away from the job?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've had a small construction company, the chain of comedy clubs. I've had restaurants. I even owned a submarine for a number of years. I had a beach shack in Hawaii for 5 years. I recently just sold and retired from having my own insurance agency for 15 years. Quite a breadth of experiences, and I was always the entrepreneur and the man behind the business. And it's very stressful. And luckily, I have a bride that's gone along with the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur. But the one thing that, and we've already touched on it, but this would be a great way to capsulate this whole podcast, is that my basis is in entertainment and connecting with people. And whether it's an audience or my clients and customers, in the customer service I provided them, or it was the restaurants and the comedy clubs, and it was my clientele, my customers that were there, it was always a joy for me to be there for those people and give them something they couldn't get somewhere else. Is that a little too vague? My point is, as I mentioned earlier, whether it was my restaurants, my comedy clubs, my insurance business, my construction company, the beach shack in Hawaii, people had a need, and I tried to listen to that need and then fulfill that need. And even though I was doing something for them, it was fulfilling to me. It made me feel like I was giving back. I was doing something for them. And that's kind of been much like a police officer, right? You're there for the people around you. You try to make mankind just a little bit better, a little bit easier. And I take some pride that I've been able to accomplish that in several different ways, but always to the value of those around me.
I love it. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I say all the time we're in the people business, and that's exactly what law enforcement is.
Well, see, you got it down to 3 words.
Which made it not
It's the
nearly as
people business.
engaging as yours.
Well, Wayne, it's been a real honor to be on this show. I think your listeners and the people out there in blue and those around the blue line need people like you to share stories, share advice, and as I mentioned, the important aspect of sharing entertainment so that people have an opportunity to get balance in their lives. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you for coming on. One last time for the listener, make sure you go to scottscomedystuff.com, follow that link down there, and we're going to link up both the stand-up comedy you're hosting MC and comedy appetizers. Scott, thank you so much for your time.
It's been a blast, and thank you, everybody, and everybody be safe out there.
And that does it for this week's The Interview Room. I hope you really enjoyed it. Another great guest will be with us again next week. We have a great lineup for you here over the next few weeks and on through the rest of the year. So you're definitely not going to want to miss a single episode. We also have Morning Roll Call, which typically comes out on Monday mornings. However, I may change my mind, and who knows? It could come out a different day of the week. But Morning Roll Call, check that out as well. That's just me talking to you, and it gives us a few minutes to go over something, anything from news or something actionable that matters, hopefully, to you. One last favor, please, 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 whatever service you are looking at or whatever service you are watching this on, you're listening to this on, please leave us a rating and review. 5 stars, that would be the appropriate number of stars. If for some reason it's not 5 stars in your opinion, or if it is, tell us why. We would love to hear it. I would love to get your feedback. In fact, I'm going to start reading some of these reviews on the air. I've been looking at some of the ones on Apple Podcast, and thank you for the phenomenal reviews. And thank you all for taking the time to listen to this. I hope you're really enjoying it. You all have a safe week out there, and I will see you next week in the interview room. I will see you next week in Morning Roll Call, but in the meantime, I'll see you on the blue line.